Why does a small strip of land the size of New Jersey remain at the center of global conflicts, drawing the attention of world leaders, activists, and entire nations? Palestine is not just a place on the map, but the heart of three world religions: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. For centuries, faith, power, and identity have collided here. But what makes this region so important even today? Why do peace talks fail to bring stability? It is not just about territory, but also about the cultural, spiritual, and political identity of the peoples connected to this land. How do international forces influence this ongoing conflict? And is there a chance for peace? Palestine is a small region on the eastern coast of the Mediterranean Sea that has served as a link between Africa, Asia, and Europe for thousands of years. This place has always been at the crossroads of trade routes and military campaigns. It was through Palestine that the armies of Egyptian pharaohs, Persian kings, Roman emperors, and Arab caliphs passed. However, the significance of this land goes far beyond its geography. In this video, we'll trace Palestine's journey from ancient civilizations to modern conflict, explore its role in the history of world religions, and see how geography and politics have made it the center of global attention. So, let's start diving into the story. Canaan is one of the oldest known names for the territory that would later become known as Palestine. This period covers the Bronze Age, when city-states flourished in the land. Canaan consisted of independent city-states that competed with each other. These cities traded with powerful civilizations such as Egypt and the Phoenicians. In the Canaanite period, one of the key events was the arrival of Abraham, who is considered the ancestor of Jews and Arabs, according to the traditions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. According to the Bible, Abraham came to Canaan in the 19th and 18th centuries BC from Mesopotamia. God made a covenant with him, promising his descendants the land of Canaan. Through his son Isaac came the Jews, and through Ishmael, the Arabs, making Abraham an important figure for the overall history of these peoples. Also, Abraham and his son Ishmael rebuilt the Kaaba on the Arabian Peninsula, which according to the Quranic version is considered to be the first home of Adam's people on earth. Archaeological evidence indicates the development of agriculture, trade, and bronze production. The Canaanites worshipped many gods, including Baal, Astarte, and El, and they developed a mythology that influenced neighboring cultures. After the period of Canaanite kingdoms, when the region witnessed many conflicts, a new chapter in its history, associated with biblical and Quranic legends. One of the central figures of this time was Moses, or Musa, in the Quran. According to the sacred texts of both religions, Moses led the Israelites out of Egyptian captivity, marking the beginning of the Exodus, an event that took place around the 13th century BC. It was one of the most significant moments for the Jewish people. They crossed the desert of Sinai on their way to Canaan, the land promised to them by God. However, Moses was not destined to see the promised land. His journey ended before the Israelites entered Canaan. Leadership over the people passed to Joshua, known in the Quran as Yusha. It was he who led the conquest of Canaan, which the Torah sees as the fulfillment of the covenant with God that promised the land to Abraham's descendants. The Quranic version also emphasizes that before the conquest, the Israelites wandered in the desert for 40 years, and only a new generation was able to enter the Promised Land. This story reflects the wisdom found in generational change. The generation that left Egypt lived in bondage to Pharaoh for many years, adopting pagan worship practices. One example was when Moses withdrew to Mount Sinai to receive revelation from God and the tablets of commandments. In his absence, the The Israelites, despite the care and supervision of Yusha, succumbed to old beliefs and made a golden calf which they began to worship. When Moses returned, he restored order among his people. Realizing that this generation was having difficulty abandoning the old customs, Moses realized that only a new generation, free from these prejudices, would be able to enter the Promised Land. After the end of the Canaanite era, the period of the kings enters the historical arena, which was pivotal to the formation of the ancient Hebrew state and the religious history of the region. At first, the tribes of Israel were disparate, but this changed with the arrival of King Saul, the first king of Israel. Saul was chosen to unite the 12 tribes and protect them from the constant attacks of the Philistines, who threatened not only the physical, but also the cultural identity of the people. After Saul's death, David took his place and became a legendary figure not only in the Bible, but also in the Quran, where he is known as the prophet Dawood. David gained fame by defeating the giant Goliath, who is referred to as Jalut in Quranic tradition. However, David's major achievement was making Jerusalem the capital of the Kingdom of Israel. This decision laid the foundation for the subsequent history of Jerusalem, which became the center of religious and political life. The reign of Solomon, son of David, marked the peak of the prosperity of the Kingdom of Israel. In biblical tradition, Solomon, Suleiman in the Quran, is known as the wisest of kings, whose reign brought stability and prosperity. One of Solomon's major achievements was the construction of the first temple in Jerusalem, which later became the sacred center of Judaism. But his role was not limited to construction and domestic politics. Solomon was a skillful diplomat, forging alliances with neighboring powers that strengthened Israel's influence in the international arena. In Quranic tradition, Suleiman is known as a prophet who had power over jinn and animals, which added a mystical flavor to his rule. However, after Solomon's death in 930 BC, the greatness of the Kingdom of Israel was threatened. Internal strife led to the division of the unified state into two, Israel in the north and Judah in the south. This split weakened both kingdoms. In 722 BC, the Assyrians conquered the northern kingdom of Israel, leaving it destroyed. The southern kingdom of Judah, though more stable, also could not avoid disaster. In 586 BC, it fell under the onslaught of Babylon, and with it, the first temple was destroyed. Nebuchadnezzar II, king of Babylon, destroyed Jerusalem and burned Solomon's temple, after which a large part of the Jewish population was deported to Babylon, modern-day Iraq. This event was an important turning point for Jewish history and religion, leaving a deep mark on their identity. This period concluded one of the most significant chapters in the history of ancient Israel and was the beginning of a centuries-long struggle over the region. In 539 BC, the history of the Jewish people entered a new era. Babylon fell to the Persians, and their mighty ruler, Cyrus the Great, became the architect of changes that would forever reshape the region. He not only conquered Babylon, but also raised the Jewish people from the ashes of exile, allowing them to return to Jerusalem. It was a time of hope and renewal when the Jews, having reclaimed their identity, began rebuilding the Second Temple, which was completed in 516 BC. This temple became a symbol not only of religious worship, but also of national unity around which the Jewish community was united. During the Persian Empire, Judea was an autonomous region under the control of Persian satraps, which allowed the locals to preserve their traditions and beliefs. This period was a time when Jewish culture and religious life flourished. Returning from exile, the Jews began to rebuild their communities, resuming Torah study and restoring the sanctuaries. The Second Temple became not only a place of sacrifice, but also a center of education and teaching, where the voices of prophets and teachers were heard again. However, the peaceful existence did not last long. In 332 BC, the conquests of Alexander the Great brought with them waves of change. Palestine came under the rule of Hellenistic powers, first the Ptolemies in Egypt, then the Seleucids in Syria. This period proved to be a time of violent confrontation between Jewish traditions and the imposed Hellenistic culture. The authorities attempted to impose a Greek way of life on the local population, which provoked considerable resistance. Seleucid rule was marked by persecution, especially under Antiochus VI Epiphanes, who, in an effort to eradicate the Jewish religion, began persecuting believers and desecrating shrines. This threat led to the Maccabean Revolt in 167 BC, a key event that led to Judah's short-lived independence under the Hasmonean dynasty. This struggle for freedom came to symbolize the resilience and determination of the Jewish people. The revolt against the oppressive regime inspired the people to defend their identity, and the victories of the Maccabees became the basis for the celebration of Hanukkah, symbolizing the victory of light over darkness. However, after a period of relative independence, in 63 BC, the Roman general Gnaeus Pompey the Great intervened in the region, seizing Judea and making it a Roman province. Jerusalem once again became the center of political and religious life, but under Roman control. Despite retaining some autonomy, local rulers had to obey the Roman authorities and fulfill their demands. The Roman administration appointed its prefects and kings to control the local population and maintain order. In this context, Herod the Great was appointed king of Judea and ruled from 37 to 4 BC. Herod, a half-blood Idumean, became a Roman protege because of his loyalty to the empire. His reign was marked by massive building projects, including the magnificent expansion of the Second Temple, which became the largest religious complex of its time. This grand reconstruction not only strengthened Herod's position among the religious elite, but also made Jerusalem an important pilgrimage destination. The dark shadow cast by Herod's brutal rule was a reminder of the constant power struggle and fear that was in the air. His atrocities were the backdrop for events that would soon change the world. In the quiet and simplicity of the small town of Bethlehem, around 4-6 BC, a man was born who would change the course of history. Bethlehem, according to ancient prophecies, was the chosen place for the birth of the Messiah from the lineage of David. At this time, the reign of Herod the Great, marked by cruelty and political intrigue, provided the backdrop for events that would soon shake the world. Jesus, raised in Nazareth in Galilee, became known as Jesus of Nazareth, reflecting not only his origins, but also the path he was about to travel. With the Roman Empire sweeping the region in the early 1st century AD, Jesus began his missionary endeavors. He did not just preach, he brought a new understanding of love, forgiveness, and the kingdom of heaven. As he traveled through Galilee and Judea, he focused on the disadvantaged and oppressed, restoring hope in their hearts. His teachings contrasted sharply with traditional Jewish views, causing growing resentment and hostility from religious leaders who saw him as a threat to their authority. Jesus also performed miracles that impressed the minds and hearts of people. He healed the sick, raised the dead, and even walked on water. Each miracle, each act of mercy only enhanced his reputation, attracting more and more followers and causing alarm among the religious elite. Especially resonant was the event of Jesus raising Lazarus, which strengthened his credibility and heightened the authorities' fear that this teaching could be the spark of rebellion. Tensions between Jesus and the Jewish elite were growing. His assertion that the kingdom of God is not in the political state, but in the hearts of men, undermined the foundations of the Pharisees' and Sadducees' power. The Jewish religious leaders, seeing him as a threat to their influence, began to weave intrigues against him, gathering evidence and building accusations. By AD 30, Jesus had become the center of attention when he arrived in Jerusalem for the Passover feast. He was greeted as the Messiah, and this caused great anxiety among local religious leaders who feared popular unrest. In the days that followed, Jesus cleansed the temple, driving out merchants and currency changers, leading to a final decision by the Jewish authorities to arrest him. Unauthorized to impose the death penalty, the Jewish authorities handed Jesus over to the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate, accusing him of blasphemy and of claiming the title King of the Jews. Despite his doubts about Jesus' guilt, Pilate, under pressure from the crowd, ordered his crucifixion, choosing this cruel method of execution for criminals and rebels. On Golgotha, amidst suffering and humiliation, Jesus accepted his fate. He was crucified and buried in a burial cave, but according to Christian belief, he was resurrected 3 days later, a pivotal event for his followers. Jesus' resurrection represented hope and new life, and this teaching quickly spread throughout the Roman Empire. After Jesus' crucifixion, his disciples, especially the apostles Peter and Paul, took on the mission of spreading Christianity throughout the Mediterranean. Using Roman infrastructure and roads, they crossed language and cultural barriers, sharing their new ideas with the world. At first, Christians were persecuted as followers of a new sect. But everything changed in the 4th century when Emperor Constantine adopted Christianity and recognized it as the official religion of the Roman Empire. This event was the turning point when a small community of believers was transformed into a powerful force ready to leave an indelible mark on human history. Roman power played a dual role in the fate of Jesus and the birth of Christianity. On the one hand, Rome maintained order and stability in the region, which indirectly contributed to the spread of the new faith. On the other hand, the Roman authorities, including Pontius Pilate, were the direct executors of Jesus' execution, which, like his subsequent resurrection, became a key event for Christianity. This period is a turning point for both Palestine and the global religious landscape, as the birth of Christianity changed the course of history. In the sacred lines of the Quran, Jesus, or Isa, appears to us not just as a figure, but as one of the greatest prophets sent by Allah. His life of significance and wisdom is central to Islam. However, the interpretation of his mission, and especially his destiny, differs significantly from Christian views. Islam asserts Jesus is a prophet, but not a divine entity. The doctrine of the Trinity and the divinity of Jesus is rejected. For Muslims, Isa is a man sent to the people of Israel to restore true teachings once distorted. Muslims believe that he was born of the Virgin Mary, yet he is not the Son of God. In the context of this theory, we can observe how the Roman Empire, which initially persecuted Christians, soon realized the strength of the growing movement and took it under its wing. In the 4th century, Emperor Constantine declared Christianity to be the official religion of the Roman Empire, and at the Council of Nicaea in 325, the doctrine of the Trinity became official in the Christian religion. The council adopted the Nicene Creed, condemned the Arian heresy, determined the time of celebration of Easter by the Christian Church, and developed 20 canons. This step contributed to the fact that Roman elements, including elements of pagan cults, were integrated into Christian teaching, creating a new religious space full of contradictions and transformations. Imagine a land where sacred texts came to life, where prophets spoke their most important words, and where the destinies of millions of people are intertwined with history. Palestine is not just a geographical space, it is the heart of the world's three major religions: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Every stone, every sacred site holds the echoes of millennia, forcing us to consider how the past shapes our present and future. It is important to consider what role this region has played in shaping each of these traditions. Palestine, also known as the Land of Israel, is central to the history of the Jewish people and their religious tradition. In Judaism, it is called the Promised Land, promised by God to the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Key events that shaped Jewish religion and identity unfolded in this land. In the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, Palestine is described as the land that God promised to the Jews through the covenant with Abraham. This place is endowed with special spiritual characteristics, and its conquest was the goal of the Exodus from Egypt led by Moses. In 1400 BCE, the Jews, after struggling for many years, began to settle the land, which was the beginning of their historical connection to the region. Jerusalem serves as the center of the religious and cultural life of the Jewish people. It became the capital of David's kingdom, and his son Solomon built the first temple, the main religious center of Judaism, completed around 957 BC. Solomon's temple and later the Second Temple, which was built in 516 BC. They played a crucial role in Jewish ritual life, becoming places of pilgrimage, sacrifice, and observance. The Temple Mount, the sacred space in Jerusalem where both temples were located, became an important symbol for the Jewish people. The destruction of the Second Temple by the Romans in 70 CE was a catastrophic event that interrupted centuries of tradition and left a deep mark on Jewish identity. But the sanctity of the site continues to be preserved. After the destruction of the Second Temple, the Western Wall was the only remaining fragment of the temple complex. Today, it is the most important place of prayer and worship for Jews, symbolizing the hope for the restoration of the sanctuary and a return to its historical roots. Thus, Palestine for Judaism is not just a territory, but a place where religious traditions were born and developed, where magnificent temples were built, and where Jews continue to seek to revitalize their spiritual life. Palestine represents a sacred land for Christians because it is here that Jesus Christ, a figure revered as the Son of God and Savior, lived, preached, suffered, and rose again. This region is full of places that are associated with the most important episodes of his life, making them centers of pilgrimage for Christians from all over the world. According to Christian tradition, Jesus Christ was born in Bethlehem, a small town near Jerusalem. This event is celebrated by Christians as Christmas, one of the most significant holidays in the Christian calendar. The Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem, built on the site of his birth, has become one of the most sacred sites for Christians, attracting pilgrims from all over the world. Nazareth, located in Galilee, is the town where Jesus spent his childhood years and began his preaching career. It was here, in the neighborhood of Galilee, that he performed many miracles that formed the basis of his teaching. These included turning water into wine in Cana of Galilee, healing the sick, and raising Lazarus. Capernaum and Lake Kinneret, Sea of Galilee, were the places where Jesus taught his disciples and performed miracles, such as walking on water and multiplying loaves and fishes. Jerusalem is the heart of Christianity, the city where the key events of Christ's Passion took place. The Last Supper, the arrest, the crucifixion, and finally the death and resurrection of Jesus took place here. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre, located in this city, is considered one of the most sacred places in the Christian world. It is built on the site where, according to tradition, Jesus was crucified, buried, and resurrected. Thousands of pilgrims visit the site every year to commemorate his sacrifice. The Garden of Gethsemane, located at the foot of the Mount of Olives, is another important place for Christians. This is where Jesus prayed on the eve of his arrest, and this garden symbolizes humility and devotion to God. Its history represents the inner struggles faced by the Savior and makes this place significant to believers. Thus, Palestine for Christianity is a holy land imbued with the life and mission of Jesus Christ, his sacrifice and resurrection. It is home to key pilgrimage sites deeply connected to his birth, ministry, and passion, making this region the center of the spiritual life of millions of believers. Palestine, and Jerusalem in particular, holds an important place in Islam, being one of the three holiest cities for Muslims, along with Mecca and Medina. The region is permeated with stories of the prophets mentioned in the Quran and events in the life of the Prophet Muhammad, making it the center of spiritual life for millions of believers. Islam honors many prophets associated with Palestine, including Ibrahim, Ishaq, Yaqub, Musa, Dawood, and Suleiman. These majestic figures not only play a key role in Judaism and Christianity, but also occupy an important place in the Islamic tradition. Thus, Daud and his son Suleiman ruled Jerusalem, which gives this city a special significance in the history of Islamic doctrine. According to Islamic legend, Prophet Muhammad made a night journey known as Isra, from Mecca to Jerusalem, on a mystical being named Al-Buraq. This journey culminated in an ascension to the heavens called Miraj, where the prophet saw the different creations of the Almighty, the seven heavens, paradise, and hell, and was also honored with direct communication with God without intermediaries as angels. And also the fivefold prayer namaz and other important provisions of Islam were approved. This event is of key importance in Islam, and in its honor, Muslims celebrate the annual festival of Isra and Miraj. The Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem is considered the place from which the Prophet ascended to heaven, and is the third most important place in Islam after Mecca and Medina. The Temple Mount is sacred to Muslims as it is one of the first destinations for prayer, Qibla, before it was changed to the Kaaba in Mecca. The Dome of the Rock, located on this mountain, is considered to be the place from where the Prophet Muhammad ascended to heaven. This dome has become a symbol of Jerusalem and an important Islamic monument of spiritual and historical significance to Muslims. Thus, for Islam, Palestine is not just a land associated with the prophets and the original direction of prayer, but also the place where one of the most significant events in the life of Prophet Muhammad took place, his night journey and ascension to heaven. This sacred land continues to inspire the faithful, reminding them of the deep connection between history and spirituality. Thus, for Islam, Palestine is not just a land associated with the prophets and the original direction of prayer, but also the place where one of the most significant events in the life of Prophet Muhammad took place, his night journey and ascension to heaven. This sacred land continues to inspire the faithful, reminding them of the deep connection between history and spirituality. Understanding the importance of Palestine to the three world religions provides the necessary foundation for the study of subsequent historical events that have profoundly shaped the destiny of the region. The medieval period and the age of the Crusades, 7th or 13th centuries, were decisive moments in the history of Palestine, when the region was at the center of the struggle between Christian and Muslim powers for control of Jerusalem and the Holy Land. During this time, important political, religious, and cultural changes took place that left a profound mark on the history of the region and the world. The fate of Palestine changed dramatically in the 7th century, when, just a few years after the passing of the Prophet Muhammad in 632, Muslim armies began the rapid expansion of the Arab Caliphate. under the leadership of the righteous Caliph Omar ibn al-Khattab. These fearless warriors conquered vast areas of the Middle East, including Palestine, which was then under the Byzantine Empire. One of the key moments of this military campaign was the Battle of Yarmouk in 636. Here, the Muslim army, led by Khalid ibn al-Walid, a commander who had never lost a battle, won a landslide victory over the Byzantine forces. This decisive battle paved the way for the conquest of Syria and Palestine, establishing new borders for the Islamic world and marking an important stage in the expansion of its territory. After the successful battle, Muslim attention focused on Jerusalem. In 638, after a long siege, the city's Byzantine patriarch, Sophronius, agreed to surrender to Caliph Umar ibn al-Khattab. According to legend, Umar himself traveled to Jerusalem, where he signed an agreement known as the Ummah Conditions, or the Pact of Umayyad, ensuring Christian safety and freedom of worship in the Holy City. After conquering Jerusalem, Muslims began construction of the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock on the Temple Mount, which was completed around 691 under the rule of the Umayyad Caliph Abd al-Malik. These majestic structures forever cemented Jerusalem's status as the third holiest city in Islam, second only to Mecca and Medina. After the Arab conquest, Palestine became part of the Arab Caliphate, and from then on, its fate was linked to the various dynasties that successively ruled the region. The first were the Umayyads, followed by the Abbasids, and finally the Fatimids. Under the rule of the Umayyads, who made Damascus their capital, Jerusalem gained special importance. With the rise to power of the Abbasids, who moved the capital of the Caliphate to Baghdad in 750, Palestine retained its importance. Despite the distance, the Abbasids continued to maintain Jerusalem as an important religious center. The city remained significant to Muslims, and the flow of pilgrims continued unabated, emphasizing its holiness. The Abbasids, while supporting the spiritual life of the region, promoted science and the arts, emphasizing spiritual and cultural traditions. From 969, Palestine came under the control of the Fatimids, the Shiite caliphs who ruled from Egypt. This period was marked by waves of instability that resulted from internal conflicts and external threats from the Byzantines and Turks. The Fatimids found it difficult to retain power, reflecting the general political situation in the region. Despite these problems, Jerusalem remained important to Muslims, and the rulers continued to support pilgrimages to the holy sites. Under Fatimid rule, Jerusalem did not lose its religious importance. The city remained the center of Islam, attracting worshippers and pilgrims, despite instability. This period witnessed not only political changes, but also cultural exchange that continued to influence the region. Islamic traditions and customs continued to evolve, enriching Palestinian culture and preserving the sanctity of Jerusalem. The governance of Palestine during the Caliphate period was a complex and multifaceted story in which political, religious, and cultural aspects were intertwined. The region, while experiencing various phases of power and influence, remained at the center of Islamic life and retained its importance for future generations. However, by the 11th century, with the deterioration of the Byzantine Empire, which faced internal crises and external threats, the authority over Palestine began to be questioned. These circumstances set the stage for new conflicts as Christians began to realize the need to intervene to regain control of sacred sites. The call to action was heard, and the signs of a new era began to appear on the horizon. As a result of these growing tensions and conflicts, a series of crusades began that became a significant period in the history of the Middle Ages. In the 11th century, the situation in Palestine underwent dramatic changes. The Byzantine Empire, weakened by internal crises, such as dynastic strife and civil wars, as well as by external threats from the Seljuk Turks, lost part of its eastern territories. In 1071, after a decisive defeat at the Battle of Manzikert, the Turks captured Jerusalem, a disastrous blow to Byzantine power. This event caused great concern among Christians because Jerusalem had great religious significance as the holy city for all Christians. In response to this threat, the Byzantine Emperor Alexius I Comnenus sent a message to Pope Urban II, asking for help in fighting the Muslims. His appeal became the basis for a call for a crusade to unite Christian Europe against a common enemy. In 1096, the First Crusade began when the Crusaders marched eastward to seize sacred lands. After several years of bloody battles, culminating in the capture of Jerusalem in 1099, the Crusaders achieved their primary goal. This event led to the establishment of the Kingdom of Jerusalem, as well as other Christian states such as the County of Edessa and the Principality of Antioch. The capture of Jerusalem in 1099 was accompanied by a massacre of the city's Muslim and Jewish population, one of the bloodiest episodes in the history of the Crusades. These actions resulted in significant civilian casualties and reflected the brutality of the war that engulfed the region. After capturing Jerusalem, the Crusaders took control of the territory and created several Christian feudal states. Jerusalem became the center of a new political entity where knights and nobles divided and ruled the land. Crusader states such as the Kingdom of Jerusalem were characterized by a feudal structure including fortresses, castles, and ecclesiastical infrastructure. This new Christian state attracted many pilgrims wishing to visit the holy places and became an important center of religious and cultural life. The Second Crusade was initiated in response to the fall of the County of Edessa in 1144, when Muslim armies under the command of Zangi, Emir of Mosul, captured this important Christian stronghold. As a result of this event, Pope Eugene III called for a new campaign, hoping to recover lost territories and strengthen the Christian position in the East. However, the Second Crusade did not achieve its goals and ultimately failed, failing to regain Edessa and other important territories. One of the most famous Muslim rulers who opposed the Crusaders was Salah al-Din Yusuf ibn Ayyub, known in the West as Saladin. Saladin united Muslim forces under his rule and inflicted a crushing defeat on the Crusaders at the Battle of Hattin on July 4, 1187. This battle was a turning point in the history of the Crusades, after which the Muslims regained control of Jerusalem. Saladin was known for his wisdom and mercy. Unlike the Crusaders who massacred Jerusalem in 1099, he showed humanity after capturing the city. Saladin allowed Christians to leave or remain in Jerusalem by paying a ransom, which demonstrated his commitment to treating captives humanely. As a result of his actions, he became a symbol of Muslim unity and resistance against the Crusaders. The Third Crusade was nized in response to the capture of Jerusalem, which occurred in 1187 under the command of Saladin. In response to this event, 3 significant European rulers were called upon to participate in the campaign: King Richard the Lionheart of England, King Philip II Augustus of France, and German Emperor Frederick I Barbarossa. This campaign became one of the most famous campaigns in the history of the Crusades. The crusade began in 1189, and although the Crusaders achieved some successes, including the capture of coastal cities such as Acca in 1191, they were unable to recapture Jerusalem. The main Crusader forces, despite strategic victories, faced organized Muslim resistance and logistical difficulties. The Crusades, beginning with the first in 1096 and ending with the loss of the last Crusader stronghold in 1291, had a profound impact on the religious and political landscape of both East and West. The Fourth Crusade, which deviated from the original goal of liberating Jerusalem and led to the capture of Constantinople, was a turning point, weakening the influence of the Byzantine Empire but not changing the situation in Palestine. Subsequent crusades, including the 5th, 6th, and 7th Crusades, failed to regain the Crusaders' lost ground, and by the end of the 13th century, Muslim forces had finally pushed them out of the region, culminating in the fall of the fortress of Acre in 1291. These events were not only the finale of the Crusader Wars, but also had significant and multifaceted consequences for all sides of the conflict. For Muslims, the Crusades strengthened unity and solidarity, allowing leaders such as Saladin to become symbols of Islamic resistance. Muslim dynasties such as the Ayyubids and Mamluks greatly strengthened their position, and Palestine remained under Muslim rule until the beginning of the Ottoman era, indicating the stability and power of the Islamic world during this period. For Christians, on the other hand, the consequences of the Crusades were more complicated. Although Christian kingdoms were established in the East, such as the Kingdom of Jerusalem, they were short-lived and failed to establish a long-term Christian presence in the region. However, the Crusades also became a catalyst for cultural and economic exchange between East and West. Europe began to gain new knowledge in science, medicine, and the arts, which eventually influenced the development of the European Renaissance. Jewish communities, unfortunately, became one of the hardest-hit parties. During the First Crusade, Jewish communities in Europe and Palestine were subjected to violence and pogroms. Many Jews were killed and communities were destroyed, leaving deep scars in the historical memory of the Jewish people. These events led to a deterioration in relations between Christians and Jews, who found themselves under suspicion and persecution over the following centuries. Thus, the consequences of the Crusades were manifold and affected all sectors of society, forming a new historical context for the further development of the region and its peoples. These changes became the basis for subsequent conflicts and interactions between different religious and cultural groups, influencing the course of history for centuries to come. This time was an era of relative stability and prosperity for the region. The Umayyads sought to consolidate Islamic power by actively developing infrastructure and culture. Jerusalem, with its holy sites, became an important center for Muslim pilgrims wishing to touch the roots of their faith. Majestic buildings, including mosques and schools, were erected during this period, facilitating cultural exchange and the development of science. The Ottoman period in the history of Palestine spans exactly 400 years, from 1517 to 1917. During this time, Palestine underwent several stages of transformation that allowed it to become an important part of the vast Ottoman Empire. During the first centuries of Ottoman rule, Palestine maintained relative stability, allowing the region to develop and prosper under the control of a powerful empire. However, with the beginning of the 19th century, the situation changed. Palestine faced many internal and external challenges that created tension and conflict. These events set the stage for modern conflicts, affecting the future of the region. What were the major changes that took place in Palestine during these 400 years? How did Ottoman rule shape the social and economic conditions that affected people's lives? The answers to these questions will help us better understand the complex processes that took place in Palestine during the Ottoman era and their implications for future generations. In the early 16th century, Palestine was under the control of the Mamluk dynasty, who ruled from Egypt. The Mamluks had held the region since 1250, actively defending it against Crusader and Mongol invasions. However, in 1516 to 1517, the Ottoman Empire, under the leadership of Sultan Selim I, launched military action against the Mamluks. The key events of this period were the battles of Marj Dabik and Ridania, in which the Ottoman forces won decisive victories. After these battles, the Ottoman Empire annexed Syria, Egypt, and Palestine, which greatly expanded its territorial possessions. The main reasons for the Ottoman conquest were the empire's desire to expand its borders, as well as the strategic importance of Palestine as an important part of the trade routes between Arabia, Egypt, and the Eastern Mediterranean. As a result of a successful campaign, Sultan Selim II captured Jerusalem without much difficulty in 1517, and from that point on, Palestine was under Ottoman control for the next 4 centuries. With the transition of the region to Ottoman rule, a new era began in which Palestine became part of the broader administrative structure of the Ottoman Empire. The period from the 16th to the 17th century in the history of Palestine is characterized by relative stability under Ottoman rule. The Ottomans introduced an effective administrative system that allowed for the administration of vast territories. The Ottoman Empire divided its possessions into provinces called eyalets, which later became known as vilayets. At the beginning of the Ottoman period, Palestine was part of the Damascus eyalet and was later included in the vilayet of Sidon. The basis of the Ottoman system of governance was taxation. Land in the region was distributed among various landowners who paid taxes to the Sultan's treasury. In Palestine, as in other Ottoman provinces, laws regulating taxation and land ownership were introduced. In the 16th century, Palestine had a predominantly agrarian economy. The main agricultural products were grains, olives, fruits, and grapes, and there was also animal husbandry. The cities of Palestine, such as Jerusalem and Hebron, prospered through trade and pilgrimage. Jerusalem remained the most important religious center for Muslims, Christians, and Jews, which contributed to its economic development. Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, who ruled from 1520 to 1566, made a significant contribution to the development of Jerusalem. He is known for rebuilding the walls of the old city, which are still standing today. These walls were built to protect the city and reaffirm its importance in the Islamic world. The Ottomans also maintained and protected other holy sites, including the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock. The Ottoman Empire had a millet policy, allowing non-Muslim communities such as Christians and Jews to retain their religion and self-government in exchange for paying taxes known as jizya. There were small but influential Jewish and Christian communities in Jerusalem and other Palestinian cities. During this period, Jewish immigrants from Spain and Portugal, fleeing persecution after the expulsion of Jews from those countries in 1492, began to arrive in Palestine. By the 18th century, the Ottoman Empire began to weaken, facing internal crises, corruption, and increasing external threats. This weakening of central authority affected the situation in Palestine, leading to significant changes in local politics and economics. With the weakening of central authority, local governors such as the Zaydan and Al-Jazar clans were given more autonomy and began to rule the provinces as semi-independent rulers. In this new political reality, there were often clashes over power and resources, increasing instability in the region. The economic situation in Palestine also deteriorated. The weakening of central authority, along with constant Bedouin raids, led to a decline in infrastructure and trade. Although the pilgrimage to Jerusalem continued to generate some income, many rural areas of the region suffered from declining agriculture and rising taxes. The 18th century was a period of economic and political decline for Palestine under the Ottoman Empire. In the 19th century, the Ottoman Empire attempted to modernize its structures through a series of reforms known as the Tanzimat, which took place from 1839 to 1876. These reforms were aimed at strengthening the position of the empire as well as modernizing the economy and the military, and affected Palestine. In 1831, Palestine was temporarily taken over by the Egyptian ruler Muhammad Ali and his son Ibrahim Pasha. This Egyptian rule lasted until 1840, but left a notable mark on the history of the region. Muhammad Ali attempted to reform the administrative system, eliminate local feudal lords, and introduce economic and military innovations. These reforms, however, displeased the local population, and in 1840, the region returned to Ottoman control. As part of the Tanzimat reforms, the Ottomans sought to modernize their state structures to increase their control over the provinces. In particular, the reforms concerned taxation, the legal system, and land ownership. In 1858, the Land Law was passed, which facilitated the registration and sale of land. This law led to the concentration of land in the hands of large landowners, which caused social problems, as peasants often lost their plots of land. During this time, Palestine became the focus of European powers, such as Great Britain, France, and Russia, who were interested in the region as a strategic point where the shrines of the three world religions were located. European countries began building churches, schools, and hospitals for Christian pilgrims and the local population. France was particularly active in supporting Catholic institutions in Jerusalem and Bethlehem. In addition, the return of Jews to Palestine, known as the First Aliyah, began in the late 19th century. This movement became part of a broader Zionist movement seeking the revival of a Jewish state in the historic homeland. Economic change also began to manifest itself in the region. In the 19th century, Palestine saw the first signs of a capitalist economy. New businesses linked to European trade, and Jaffa, Haifa, and Acre developed as important trading ports. Nevertheless, modernization was slow, and the majority of the population continued to live in poverty, practicing agriculture and crafts. As the 20th century began, tensions in Palestine increased due to the rise of Zionism, Arab nationalism, and international interests in the region. The Ottoman Empire, already known as the sick man of Europe, struggled to maintain control over its holdings, but faced many external and internal challenges. During World War I, which began in 1914, the Ottoman Empire aligned itself with the Central Powers, which included Germany and Austria-Hungary. This led to conflict with Great Britain and its allies. In the 1917 war, British forces under General Edmund Allenby invaded Palestine, taking Jerusalem in December of that year. The British Army entered Jerusalem without a fight, symbolically ending Ottoman rule in the region. After the end of the war in 1920, a British mandate was established in Palestine by the League of Nations, which changed the political map of the region and laid the groundwork for further conflicts. Ottoman rule had a significant impact on Palestinian history. It preserved the multi-ethnic and multi-religious character of the region, which was supported by the Ottoman millet system that allowed different religious communities to maintain their identity and autonomy. The administrative reforms and attempts at modernization implemented in the 19th century created the basis for subsequent economic and political transformation. However, the weakening of central authority, the growth of European influence, and the rise of national movements such as the Zionist and Arab movements at the end of the Ottoman period set the stage for the conflicts that erupted in the 20th century. The period of the British Mandate in Palestine is a key moment in the history of the region and a precursor to the current Arab-Israeli conflict. During these 30 years, Palestine underwent significant political, demographic, and social changes that paved the way for the establishment of the State of Israel and subsequent conflicts. Let us examine this period in more detail. During World War I, Palestine was ruled by the Ottoman Empire, an ally of the Central Powers that included Germany and Austria-Hungary. However, this changed dramatically in 1917 when British forces under the command of General Edmund Allenby occupied Palestine. A key moment in this process was the entry of British troops into Jerusalem in December 1917, which effectively ended Ottoman rule in the region. Following the end of World War I, the League of Nations gave Britain a mandate to govern Palestine, which was formalized in 1922. Under the terms of the mandate, Britain undertook to administer the territory and prepare it for future independence. This mandate became part of the post-war system of governance, also covering Lebanon, Syria, and Iraq, and was aimed at restoring stability to regions formerly under Ottoman control. A key event in British policy toward Palestine was the Balfour Declaration, adopted in 1917. This letter, written by British Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour to Lord Rothschild, the leader of the British Jewish community, became the basis of British support for the Zionist movement. The text of the declaration noted that His Majesty's government views favorably the establishment in Palestine of a national hearth for the Jewish people, and will make every effort to promote this goal, provided that the civil and religious rights of the non-Jewish communities living in Palestine are not infringed. This declaration was the first official British recognition of the rights of the Jewish people to establish a national hearth in Palestine. It played a key role in the growth of the Zionist movement, a political and ideological movement that sought to establish a Jewish state in the historic homeland known as the Land of Israel. The Zionist movement began to take shape in the late 19th century, influenced by the ideas of Theodor Herzl, seeking to establish a Jewish state. This movement resulted in waves of Jewish immigration to Palestine, known as Aliyot. The first Aliyah, which took place from 1882 to 1903, marked the arrival of the first Jewish settlers in Palestine when the Jewish community in the region was small. The second Aliyah, 1904 to 1914, was characterized by an increase in the number of Jewish settlers, especially after the pogroms in the Russian Empire, which encouraged active land acquisition and the establishment of agricultural communities known as kibbutzim. With the onset of the British Mandate, and especially after the Balfour Declaration, Jewish immigration to Palestine increased significantly. By the 1920s, the number of Jewish settlers in the region had increased significantly, which caused concern among the Arab population and predetermined the further development of the conflict in Palestine. Before mass Jewish immigration began, the vast majority of the population of Palestine was Arabs, mostly Muslims and Christians. The Arabs had lived in the land for centuries, and British mandate policies and the growth of the Jewish community had become a serious threat to them. Since the Balfour Declaration in 1917, the Arab population has strongly opposed the document, considering Palestine their homeland. Arab leaders perceived the declaration as an injustice because it ignored their right to self-determination. From the 1920s, Arabs began to actively protest against Jewish immigration and British policies. The main forms of protest were strikes, demonstrations, and armed uprisings. The first serious clashes between Arabs and Jews occurred in Jerusalem in 1920. Arab leaders called for resistance to Jewish immigration, which erupted into violence. Clashes also occurred in Jaffa in 1921, resulting in many casualties on both sides, increasing tensions in the region and forcing the British authorities to reconsider their policies. The most significant act of Arab resistance was the Great Arab Revolt, which lasted from 1936 to 1939. Arabs declared a general strike and organized armed attacks on British authorities and Jewish settlements. The uprising was brutally suppressed by British troops with the support of Jewish paramilitary groups such as the Haganah. By the 1920s and 1930s, Arab nationalist sentiment in Palestine had grown. Arabs began to demand an end to Jewish immigration, the establishment of an independent Arab state, and an end to the British Mandate. An important role in this process was played by the Mufti of Jerusalem, Hajj Amin al-Husseini, who became a symbol of Arab resistance and a spokesman for their demands. In response to growing Arab resistance and violence, Britain issued the White Paper in 1922. This document reaffirmed support for the Balfour Declaration, but stipulated that Palestine would not be turned into an exclusively Jewish state. It also emphasized that Jewish immigration would be restricted. Despite the conflicts, the Jewish community in Palestine continued to develop in the 1920s and 1930s, creating important political and economic structures. A number of organizations played a significant role in this context. The Jewish Agency. This was the main political body of the Jewish community in Palestine, representing Zionist interests before the British authorities. Its establishment was an important step in the organization of Jewish life in the region. Haganah, a paramilitary organization established to protect Jewish settlements from attack. The Haganah later became the basis for the formation of the Israeli Army, IDF, indicating its importance in the military history of the region. Yishuv. This is the name of the Jewish community in Palestine, which by the 1940s had developed into a well-organized entity with its own institutions, economy, and educational system. Yishuv became the basis for the formation of the Jewish nation-state. Amidst political instability and conflict, the Jewish community in Palestine was able to create important institutions that were key to the further development of the region and preparation for the establishment of the independent State of Israel. With the outbreak of World War II in 1939, the situation in Palestine changed significantly. The Holocaust and the persecution of Jews in Europe catalyzed a new wave of immigration to the region. However, the British government, in an effort to limit Jewish migration, issued the White Paper that same year. This document significantly reduced the number of immigration permits and restricted land purchases by Jews. This policy drew sharp criticism from Zionists, especially against the backdrop of the extent of Nazi terror in Europe. After the war, in the context of growing discontent, Jewish radical groups such as the Irgun and Lehi began armed resistance to the British Mandate. They organized terrorist attacks against British military installations and authorities, protesting the restrictions imposed by the government. One of the most notorious acts of violence during this period was the attack on the King David Hotel in Jerusalem in 1946. The Irgun, under the leadership of Menachem Begin, organized an explosion at the hotel, which housed the British administration. The attack killed 91 people and symbolized the growing conflict between Jewish groups and the British authorities. World War II was a watershed moment in which Jewish immigration to Palestine increased, and tensions between Jewish and Arab communities continued to rise, leading to a new round of violence and conflict. By the end of World War II, in 1945, the situation in Palestine had become extremely tense. Jews and Arabs were engaged in armed struggle, and Britain was unable to cope with the escalating situation. In 1947, Britain referred the question of the future of Palestine to the United Nations. In the same year, the UN proposed a plan to divide Palestine into two states, Jewish and Arab. According to this plan, Jerusalem was to be under international administration. The Jewish leadership, led by David Ben-Gurion, supported the plan, although it did not secure all the territory claimed by the Zionist movement. They saw the proposal as a step toward the establishment of an independent Jewish state. At the same time, Arab leaders strongly rejected the UN plan, considering it unjust. The Arabs insisted that Palestine should remain a united Arab state, which further exacerbated the conflict. After the United Nations vote, clashes between Jewish and Arab forces began. These clashes quickly escalated into a full-scale civil war in Palestine. As chaos grew, British troops began to leave the region. On May 14, 1948, the British Mandate officially ended. On that day, the Jewish leadership proclaimed the establishment of the State of Israel. This event was the culmination of the British Mandate and ushered in a new era of conflict in the Middle East. In 1948, the world witnessed the establishment of the State of Israel, which was a turning point in modern history. This event not only marked a new era for the Jewish people, but also catalyzed profound changes in the political map of the Middle East. Soon after the Declaration of Independence, the Arab-Israeli conflicts began, which led to many wars and mass migrations. These events not only shaped the fate of millions of people, but also created the basis for tensions in the region, the effects of which continue to be felt to this day. On May 14, 1948, the day before the official end of the British Mandate, David Ben-Gurion, leader of the Jewish Yishuv, declared the independence of the State of Israel. This event occurred in accordance with the partition plan for Palestine proposed by the United Nations in 1947. The plan called for the creation of two states, one Jewish and one Arab. However, it generated considerable controversy. Jewish leaders generally accepted the Palestine partition plan, even though not all Zionist leaders were satisfied with the proposed borders. Israel received 55% of the territory, including large areas of the Negev Desert and parts of the Galilee. Arab leaders strongly rejected the UN plan, considering it unfair because the Arab population should have received a smaller portion of the territory. In response, Arab countries and Palestinian Arabs began preparing for armed resistance. Jordan annexed the West Bank and East Jerusalem, and Egypt took control of the Gaza Strip. Even before the official declaration of the State of Israel, clashes between Arab and Jewish communities erupted in Palestine. After May 14, 1948, when Israel's independence was declared, Arab armies invaded Israel to destroy the new state. Despite the numerical superiority of the Arab armies, Israel proved to be better organized and armed. This was made possible by aid from Europe and the support of the Jewish diaspora. Israeli forces, such as the Haganah and Irgun, were able to hold key territories and even seize more land than the UN plan called for. During the war, hundreds of thousands of Palestinian Arabs left their homes or were forced to flee in what became known as the Nakba, which means catastrophe in Arabic. Estimates of the number of refugees vary, but estimates vary between 700,000 and 750,000 Palestinians became refugees, resettling in neighboring countries or camps in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. The war ended in 1949 with the signing of armistices between Israel and a number of Arab countries. As a result of the conflict, Israel expanded its borders, controlling about 78% of the territory of former Mandatory Palestine, far exceeding the planned size under the UN plan. None of the Arab states recognized the State of Israel, and Palestinian refugees were left without a solution to their status. The issue of their return and compensation has become an important and unresolved part of the Arab-Israeli conflict. In 1956, the next major conflict between Israel and the Arab countries occurred. The military operation was initiated by Israel in conjunction with Britain and France in response to Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser, who nationalized the Suez Canal, previously controlled by these two European powers. Israeli troops invaded and quickly captured the Sinai Peninsula. The main purpose of this operation was not only to weaken Egypt, but also to prevent attacks by Palestinian militants who were supported by Nasser. The conflict caught the attention of the international community, leading to the intervention of the UN and the US. Under pressure from these countries, Israel, Britain, and France were forced to withdraw their troops from Egypt. In return, Egypt agreed to provide free passage through the Suez Canal for all countries. In June 1967, one of the most significant conflicts in the history of Arab-Israeli relations, the Six-Day War, took place. By this time, tensions between Israel and its neighbors, especially Egypt, Syria, and Jordan, had reached a critical point. Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser increased pressure on Israel by closing the Strait of Tiran to Israeli ships and demanding the withdrawal of UN peacekeeping troops from the Sinai Peninsula. On June 5, 1967, Israel launched a preventive attack on Egypt, which soon expanded into Syria and Jordan. In 6 days of intense fighting, Israel defeated the armies of Egypt, Syria, and Jordan, and greatly expanded its borders. As a result of the war, Israel captured the following territories: the Sinai Peninsula and the Gaza Strip from Egypt, the West Bank of the Jordan River and East Jerusalem from Jordan, and the Golan Heights from Syria. Israel's victory in the Six-Day War secured strategically important territories that were subsequently the subject of negotiations and conflicts. In particular, the capture of Jerusalem and the West Bank led to a sharp deterioration in relations with the Palestinian population and the Arab states. Israel strengthened its position as the leading military power in the region, but faced new challenges related to the administration of the occupied territories and the rise of Palestinian resistance. In October 1973, the conflict that has gone down in history as the Doomsday War, also known as the October War or the Ramadan War, broke out. During this period, while Jews were celebrating the holiday of Yom Kippur, Egyptian and Syrian troops suddenly attacked Israel. The purpose of this operation was to regain territories lost in the 1967 Six-Day War, including the Sinai Peninsula and the Golan Heights. The Arab armies made significant gains in the first days of the war, but Israel was soon able to mount a counteroffensive and regain its strategic position. The Doomsday War also became an arena for geopolitical confrontation between the two superpowers, the United States and the USSR. The United States supported Israel, while the Soviet Union supported the Arab countries. Both powers intervened in the conflict through both diplomatic and military means, which eventually led to a ceasefire brokered by the United Nations. After the Doomsday War, the first attempts at peace between Israel and the Arab countries began, marking an important milestone in the history of the Middle East. One of the first major breakthroughs in the peace process was the peace treaty between Israel and Egypt, signed in 1978. Mediated by the United States, Egyptian President Anwar Sadat, and Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin reached the Camp David Accords. The move drew condemnation from many Arab countries and led to Egypt's temporary isolation in the Arab world. Nevertheless, the agreement ended the long-term military conflict between Israel and Egypt. Israel agreed to withdraw its troops from the Sinai Peninsula, returning it to Egypt, and Egypt became the first Arab country to recognize the State of Israel. After decades of confrontation between Israel and the Palestinians, the Oslo Accords were signed in 1993 between the Israeli government and the Palestine Liberation Organization, PLO, led by Yasser Arafat. These agreements included Israel's recognition of the PLO as the representative of the Palestinian people, establishment of Palestinian autonomy in the Gaza Strip and West Bank, Establishment of plans for negotiations on the status of Jerusalem, Palestinian refugees, and borders. However, these agreements have sparked fierce debate among both Palestinians and Israelis. Radical factions on both sides oppose the peace process, leading to an upsurge in violence and destabilization of the region. Since the late 1980s, Palestinians have twice organized mass uprisings known as intifadas. The first intifada, covering the period from 1987 to 1993, was a mass uprising against the Israeli occupation of the West Bank and Gaza Strip. This protest was an important factor in the initiation of peace negotiations between Israel and the Palestine Liberation Organization. The Second Intifada, which took place from 2000 to 2005, was triggered by the failure of peace talks and the visit of Israeli politician Ariel Sharon to the Temple Mount. The uprising was accompanied by terrorist attacks, armed clashes, and significant loss of life. Since 2007, the Gaza Strip has been under the control of Hamas, an Islamist movement that openly opposes the existence of Israel. Israel and Hamas have repeatedly engaged in armed conflict, resulting in destruction and loss of life on both sides. In 2008, 2012, 2014, and 2021, Israel conducted major military operations against Hamas in response to rocket fire and attacks. These conflicts were accompanied by massive destruction and deaths of both Palestinian and Israeli civilians. The situation in the region continues to be tense, reflecting the complex historical and political factors that contribute to conflict. Palestine is a unique territory of great significance for the three major world religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. It has been the site of key events that shaped these faiths. Palestine is not just a geographical place, it is a sacred land where the histories and missions of three religious traditions intersected. For Judaism, Palestine is known as the Promised Land, given by God to the Jewish people. Jerusalem, the city that housed Solomon's temple, represents the central sanctuary of the Jewish faith. Christianity associates Palestine with the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, the Savior and Son of God. Bethlehem, Nazareth, and Jerusalem are key holy sites for millions of Christians around the world. For Islam, Palestine is important as a place associated with many prophets such as Ibrahim, Musa, and Dawood. Jerusalem holds the third most important position among the holy cities for Muslims, for it is from here, according to Islam, that the Prophet Muhammad ascended to heaven during his night journey. This land has not only religious, but also political and cultural significance, making it the center of global conflicts and interests for many centuries. Palestine, where the missions of three religions intersect, is pivotal for millions of believers around the world. The confluence of these three religious traditions complicates the resolution of today's conflict, but makes it particularly important for achieving long-awaited peace in the region.